Welcome back. We're super excited to kick off our second season of the Start a Brewery podcast. As you may already know, this is where we powwow with savvy craft beer industry folks about all things relating to startups, open, and growing breweries, truly from concept to execution. We are pleased to partner with All About Beer to make each and every podcast happen. You're joining us today for episode 25, launching season 2. I'm Laura Lodge here with Candace Moon, and we're excited to welcome you to our ongoing podcast journey. As your hosts and founders of Start a Brewery, we both have extensive experience in our areas of specialty. Candace is the craft beer attorney based in San Diego, and I am the strategic consultant behind customized craft beer programs. You can find more information about us and our contributors, plus a whole bunch of information and resources at startabrewery.com.
Interested in acquiring an existing brewery? Contact the craft beer attorney for a complimentary consultation. Go to www.craftbeerattorney.com and click Contact CBA to get started.
Among the goals for our second season is to address questions that come our way from listeners. As a result, we're starting off with a series of episodes built around this question we received. Instead of building from scratch or converting and repurposing a restaurant or industrial space, what if I'm interested in purchasing an existing brewery? So this will be episode 25, Purchasing an Existing Brewery, and we'll begin with the legal lens, the general due diligence, and some overall strategy you'll need should you be looking into this option. Additional episodes will include the financial opportunities and challenges involved, equipment and infrastructure considerations, and then we'll get into some marketing and branding. Some of the content we cover here may also be mentioned or covered in part later, which will underscore its importance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Candace to guide us into purchasing an existing brewery.
Thanks, Laura. So today we're pleased to welcome to our conversation Brook Bristow, attorney at Lager, Bristow Beverage Law. Sorry, I always stumble on the attorney at Lager because it makes me smile. And Jeff O'Brien, attorney partner, Chestnut Cambronne. Let's start with having you guys give our listeners a little bit of your background. Brook, you want to go first?
Sure. I've practiced law since 2007, South Carolina based, statewide. I do have some regional clients. We've worked with anyone from startups to, a few national brands. Typically we're very straight into the food and beverage space only. Typically that means advising on state, federal compliance issues, licensing contracts, intellectual property, federal label formula approvals, that type of things. Kind of just small business law being a bit of a Swiss Army knife in terms of advising our clients. Worked with breweries probably for about 10 years now. Wrote some legislation in South Carolina, that type of thing. So I've got some street cred, I guess.
Nice. Jeff?
Well, like Brook, I've got kind of a concentration these days in the food and beverage space. Also here, being from Minnesota, cannabis now too, practicing Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and the Dakotas. And I have a few clients for some federal issues that are outside of those states. Do general counsel for those businesses, but also I do a lot of mergers and acquisition work, not just for food and beverage clients, but just businesses in general. So what we're talking about today, it's sort of, I think I'm averaging about 2 to 3 deals a month these days. It's pretty crazy. A lot of people are just in the mood to sell a business, and breweries are no different.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that just so the listeners know we apparently have the country covered. We got East Coast, the middle, and I don't know what to call the middle, the mid. And I'm on the West Coast, so from the legal side. And my practice is very similar to Brook's, but which is why I'm glad Jeff's here today, because this is definitely not an area of expertise for me, other than whereas my firm, we haven't really participated as much I've done a lot of the due diligence, let's put it that way. But when it comes to the structure of the deal, a lot of times we'll send that to another firm. But so that's one of the things I really kind of wanted to dig in. So let's start with a general question. And this is for both you guys, and we'll start with Jeff, and then I'll just kind of go back and forth. And then, of course, I'll stick in my 2 cents every once in a while. What is your first reaction when someone tells you they're considering purchasing an existing brewery and why?
So funny enough, I think usually my first question is, which one is it, just to make sure that it's not one of mine that's also selling. And believe it or not, it's happened a couple of times. I had a few people that approached me, and they said, we're buying a brewery. Which one is it? And I'm like, wait a minute. I already represent them, right? So, it's just the struggle of always when you're representing breweries, as some of these that are selling, if somebody wants to buy one, you could end up, you got to run your conflict area first. But beyond that, I want to know, if they tell me which one they're buying, I go out and just kind of do some research on my own, and I want to find out, a little bit about the brewery, if there's any issues, if, what I can find from kind of a 10,000 feet up internet due diligence standpoint as to the business and what they're looking at buying into.
Brooke, what's your first reaction?
Same in terms of, I want to know. And, I have had it happen where it's a brewery I represent and I'm completely in the dark on it. And then that makes for a fun, awkward moment. And we laugh and laugh. But beyond that, I don't know. For some reason, I sometimes just put my beer fan hat on at the start, just because, I don't know, I feel like I'm not a bank, I'm not any of these things, but like I kind of want to know, like show me the rationale, and then I don't know, I kind of want to be sold on it too. Like why do you want to do this? Why does this make sense? And obviously they're entitled to do whatever they want, but I think my first reaction is I'm always to ask, why do you want to do that? Kind of like if someone wanted to come in and just start their own brewery from square one. Well, why would you want to do that? That's generally my first reaction. Maybe it's not the right one, but that's mine.
Actually, you guys are much more, I'm going to give my real reaction, at least not, and this is not the reaction I give to the prospect potential client, but my inside reaction is like, oh God. It's just from a legal perspective. I feel like this is let's put this way. Yes, I will probably make a good deal of money because there's a lot of work to be done from a legal perspective when trying to look at an existing entity, assets, potential liabilities, than if we're starting from ground zero and we're creating a new entity, which I know doesn't have any liabilities, and we're creating all the documents from scratch. So I know it's all good and clean. So my internal reaction is crap, but okay. Why? I totally understand why. Because there's so many other reasons that do, I think, make it a good option in terms of dealing with construction and perhaps costs and perhaps equipment and all the things that we're going to talk about in future episodes. And also I will, again, just like Brooke and Jeff said, I have quite frequently, mainly because being in California, people in California call me, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I have at some point represented the brewery they want to buy. And it's nice that I have other California attorneys that do beer law that I can refer them to on the purchase agreement side. Although I will say I do offer that we can help with the licensing down the road if they need it, but we're definitely, conflicted out of helping, 2 breweries that we've worked with try and do a purchase agreement. So, okay, so next question. And this is where I'm going to kind of look to both of you to start the laundry list, and we can all chime in on what other things we think of. But when you're looking to purchase, and this is, I'd say, an existing business, regardless of whether it's a brewery or not. So Jeff's going to have a lot to say for us. What should people be looking at? Like, what is the due diligence? What are the things they need to do to look into, to check, and to help make this decision, whether this is the right brewery to buy or not?
Yeah, so, for due diligence, I have a checklist that I give out to my clients, regardless of what the business is. But you're going to want to look at things like, you want the asset list, equipment, inventory. You You want to see a list of any trademarks that are filed, and do some checking on those. You want copies of any material contracts. So if the business is leasing its space, you want to see the lease, because you need to look in there and see what it says about a change in control, because there are leases I've seen drafted that say upon a change of control, the landlord actually can terminate the lease. So you want to look at those kinds of things. You want to take a look at, you're going to do you're going to have your attorney do a UCC, Uniform Commercial Code lien search. You're going to do a judgment lien search. You're going to look at tax liens. To the extent that you can get any records from the TTB to find out if they've filed their reports, that they've paid their excise taxes. Regardless of whether you're doing it as a purchase of the ownership interest in the existing entity or an asset sale where you're trying to leave the liabilities behind, you need to know what the liabilities are. And if there's any that you need to assume in order to continue to do the business. Like, is there a hop supply contract, for example? Could be an example of a material contract that may need to be in place. Or what's the distribution situation? Is there a distribution agreement in place, right? Because do you have the ability to terminate the distribution agreement upon a sale, which it's not always easy to do. So those are some real basic examples of things I think that you just kind of have to go through. And then you get into stuff like, checking, the license statuses. It's not so much, I think, with at the federal level. The brewer's notice is the brewer's notice, making sure that everything is current with the state, and then really kind of looking at the city to make sure that what business licenses are needed or what needs to be done in order to transfer the business at that end. Like, for an example, where I am here based in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis City Code requires, if there's an ownership transfer, you have to notify the city council. And we have to write that into our operating agreements. So, and I'm sure they're not the only one that does that, because they want to make sure that they aren't, that they haven't granted a license to someone that they don't want holding a license to sell alcohol. So just something to think about. You kind of got to go through all levels of government besides, just to make sure you've got all your bases covered.
Brooke?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We could, all of us carry, our own checklists and things like that. These things can just go on and on and on. It really depends, how much do you want to ask for? Some other considerations might be, are you, like Jeff said, are you buying the assets or are you buying the entity? If you're buying the entity, then you're going to want to know, other stuff, organizational chart. What are your list of your employees? Policy.
Hold up for a second. Explain to our listeners the difference between buying an entity and buying the assets.
Right. Two ways to do a purchase. One would just be simply like, hey, I'm coming in, I'm just buying your stuff, buying your assets, buying your equipment, taking over your lease, that type of thing, versus I'm buying all your stock or membership interest in your company, your LLC or corporation or whatever. And then with that, I'm getting everything. Different people would have different reasons for which one they want to do and why. There are certainly some tax considerations, other things like that when choosing which one to do, or just for ease, or what you intend on doing. Do you intend on running the brewery that was, or are you just coming in and you're going to slap your name on it and change some stuff up and do it that way? That'll be, that's just a consideration. Are you taking over the company? You doing the company still, or are you going to do your own thing? That could affect that decision.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off on your laundry list. If you want to jump back, when you mentioned that, I was like, let's explain that a little more in detail. Well, then let's take that tangent and we'll come back to the laundry list, because I do think this is in my mind one of the most important considerations. And I'll give my 2 cents because I want Jeff to go last, because I feel like he's much more of the expert. But my general take, and again, this also could be because I'm in California, is I would almost always rather than buy the assets. But unfortunately, the benefit to buying the entity is that you basically can continue operating. So since you take, at least again, this is for California, you take over the license because the company is who owns the license. You as the owner, so you get the license from day one. Now you do have to submit all your ownership information to ABC, but you're really updating your license. Now that doesn't mean they can't come back and say, no, you're not acceptable, but you're still operating the whole time this paperwork update is taking place, which is very, very enticing to a lot of people, which I totally understand. But I feel like the dangers potentially of buying an entity, especially in California, I worry about all the employment law liability, mainly because California has, it's really hard to be a good, solid, legally correct employer as it is, especially as a mom and pop, because there's so many things you have to do, little nitpicky things that are not necessarily logical that you would normally think to stay legal and compliant in California, especially with wage and hour law. And a lot of these type of liabilities continue for a number of years, even if the employee is no longer there. So back to the due diligence to some extent, I'm always like, I want to see all the employee records because I'm also really concerned that the entity, and not the entity, but the people running the entity have not necessarily kept all their records as thoroughly and completely as they should have, which then makes another red flag to buying the entity because I feel like that implies potential more liabilities. You know, Jeff mentioned getting all the contracts. That's always fun. Trying to, if they have a copy that's actually signed by anyone, same with their business documents. Do they have them? Are they signed? And to the change of control with the lease, just one thing that happened, we had a client who were reading the lease and it mentions it has like 3 people who signed it. And I'm like, wait, but your company, you told us you only have these 2 people. Yeah, well, that guy left like 5 years ago. Well, you didn't notify the landlord of the change of control? No, we didn't think we needed to. Okay, so you've already violated the lease before my client is potentially going to go in and take over the lease. And it's those kind of things that you just kind of have to dig and dig and dig. So again, that's where I'm very wary of buying the entity because I'm worried about all the potential liabilities. Laura?
I saw something I think yesterday on John Hyman's blog about the fact that you may be inheriting a union. And I thought that was just another wild card too.
Well, at this point, I'm going to throw it back to Jeff because I feel like he's definitely more the expert on this area and has, especially with the number of times he's seen this happen with, and again, this is in every business situation. I mean, the license piece, not necessarily, but every business has this potential. So I'm going to go back to Jeff for his take on this.
Yeah, to Laura's point, with the union employee issue, a collective bargaining agreement would be another one of those material contracts. When you do if we're doing a purchase agreement, whether it be an asset purchase or a stock purchase, you're going to have a whole series of representations and warranties on behalf of the seller, and this is the game that we attorneys play. Is the seller wants to minimize those reps and warranties, and as buyer's counsel, you want as many as possible, and you want to know, is there any ongoing litigation? Are there any, employee, what are the employee benefits? Is there a 401k? Is there any, a collective bargaining agreement? Are there employment contracts? Need to see them all. We need to see at least 3 years of financial statements. We want to see the tax returns. You want to see all this stuff. It's nice in this day and age with everything being in the cloud. I love having data rooms, right? It makes it so much easier than shuffling these large contracts back and forth anymore. It's just like we'll set up a data room and the seller can just start dumping the organizational documents, contracts, everything they have into a data room. And, it can be the attorneys that organize those. If there's a broker involved, they might organize it. But it's a really, I think, a really straightforward way to pass information and for all hands. So like, if I want to see anything on the due diligence, I can go into the data room. If we need the CPA to take a look at something, you give them access, they can go into the data room. Everybody can have access to that stuff in one place versus having to shuffle emails around and then something gets missed. So that's a big advantage with technology these days. And I think it makes for more thorough due diligence too. And then you want to just, besides the due diligence checklist, you want to have a checklist of everything you have to do for the transaction. Not just, it could be everything from, drafting the purchase agreement to getting certificates of good standing from the entities involved to verify that they have the authority to do it. So there's a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross in these things for sure.
Okay, so let's go into some more. I'm gonna dig. Actually, I'm gonna double back for a minute. Brooke, I never gave you the opportunity to finish your due diligence list. Was there anything that we haven't mentioned that you've dealt with or thought about?
I'm sure we could go on and on about, what needs to be on the list. I guess something that we occasionally see just in terms of smaller breweries is maybe some people aren't willing to give up certain documents, and as the buyer, they're not willing to push for it, which end up being fairly material to deals. Probably from the lawyer's perspective makes us crazy. But not wanting to, not trying to blow up someone's deal, but I don't know. I would just say, just listen to your attorney, please. We're asking for things for a reason. I'm
gonna actually tack onto that. Please use an attorney, because believe it or not, I had a client come on board for licensing, and when we asked for they had bought another brewery, and we were given what looked like some version of a standard California commercial purchase agreement, but we couldn't even tell from the documents if they purchased the entity or the assets, and no one seemed to really know. It was a huge mess. But this is one of those things. This is as I know our listeners are like, I am not one to say, oh, go get an attorney for every single thing, even though honestly, if you have the money, you can do. But but this is one of those things. This is right up there in my mind with distribution agreements and things that this is huge and this is important, and you need to have an attorney review this. And I will even further recommend that all those things that I say you should have an attorney for, a lease, distribution agreements, you need to have an attorney review those of the brewery you're purchasing. You need to know what you're getting into. If you're taking over a lease, what if they signed a really crappy lease? You may or may not, you may be stuck with that. I mean, especially if you buy the entity. If you're buying the assets, you may be able to negotiate a new lease, but same with distribution agreements. You're going to be stuck with what other person before you've signed. And that, believe me, is a pretty scary proposition, because some folks really don't read anything or spend the money to have an attorney review it, and they just sign what's given to them. So again, if you're especially buying the entity, you're agreeing to everything they already agreed to. So you need to make sure you understand what they agree to and what you're getting yourself into. So, okay.
Hey, Candace, one other point, when we're talking about these transactions, there's another party here that gets involved besides just the buyer and seller. It's not always between them. And some of this stuff in terms of due diligence, especially, you get the lender, the buyer is financing the purchase, and you get the lender involved, and they may need to see certain things because of the nature of the financing. I'm working on a deal right now where there's going to be an SBA loan. We've had to restructure the deal a certain way because that's what the lender needed to get the financing done. We have to have certain documents in place because that's what the lender needs to get the financing done. So it's the old golden rule, right? He who has the gold makes the rules. The lender can control a lot of this, some of the information flow and the deal terms, because they basically say we won't lend if we don't see this.
I didn't even think about that. Definitely. Although it did bring to mind, and a lot of, I think, especially buying a small brewery now, I have people dealing with existing SBA loans on how to structure the deal so that the existing loan, either the lender is made happy or the original borrower, the original brewery, is trying to figure out how to pay it off in order to sell their brewery.
Right. No, or in the rare instance, I had one that happened this way, especially with rates the way they are right now. If you can find a loan that's assumable, that was taken out, say, 10 years ago, you're golden, and so I actually had done one of those deals where the buyer actually assumed the existing financing. Seller, the guarantors get dropped off after a period of time, but I think that's rare, but it was a nice thing to have happen, certainly right now in this environment.
Definitely.
Since 2009, Candace Moon and the Craft Beer Attorney have been servicing craft breweries nationwide. From the minute you decide you want to open a craft brewery of your own, we're here to help. We have extensive experience in brewery-specific contract review, whether it's distribution or contract brewing agreements, as well as trademark filings, employment law, and state and federal alcohol licensing. We know what it takes to start, own, and operate your craft brewery. Contact us today.
Jeff, I'm going to jump back to you with this. Are there restrictions around investors contributing to the purchase of an existing business? And how does that affect a deal, essentially?
Well, obviously, if there's, all the states have their 3-tier rules. So you've got restrictions, of course, as to somebody who owns an interest in a wholesale licensee or a retail licensee is not going to be allowed to invest in the brewery. Now, if they're married, the spouse can invest. In most states, they treat the spouse independently. So that was just going to be aware of that.
By the way, not in California. The spouse is completely the same.
I suppose with community property, yeah. Here in Minnesota, it is. They have a policy with our Alcohol and Gambling Enforcement Division that is, long as the spouse is coming in with their own independent funds, that they are treated as a separate party from the party that's that's holding the entity that holds the license. So we get a lot of bar owners whose spouses are owning breweries and distilleries in our state. So when it comes to that, you just got to make sure again that if there are restrictions like that. But then back to the question about we're talking about asset sale versus entity sale and timing and complexity. If you talk about that continuing process of I want to keep making beer, I'll keep operating the business. There are situations where you might have some of the ownership hang back and be part of if you do the stock sale and only sell, say, 80% of the stock, and then you file your amended documents with the TTB as a change of ownership versus starting from scratch, that does allow you to keep rolling with the business. Whereas you do run the risk if you do it as an asset sale. There's a point in time where the TTB tells you to stop. They won't. So you have to have a stop date for the old license and then a start date for the new one. So it's very complex, but there are situations where it may merit consideration doing the equity purchase so you can just keep the business operations going.
I'm also going to mention, just because this happened to one of my clients, and I'm sure you two are pretty familiar with this, where you're supposed to update TTB, and California is the same, within 30 days of officer owner changes, and it's quite rare that I can get that information within 30 days generally. And I had a client who, I don't think took their time. I don't think it was that, but they're trying to do 8,000 things, and this wasn't high on their priority list. And by the time we submitted it to TTB, they were like, it's been past 30 days. So, you have no license right now until we process this. Now, that said, they processed it the next day. Thank goodness. So it, in reality, wasn't an issue, but that doesn't mean that that's not how it could have gone. So I just want to warn all the listeners that when you do any kind of these transactions, or really just any management changes at all, you really need to notify the alcohol agencies and possibly your local within the timeline they specify, because they can pull your license.
I think that's one of the advantages, Candace, of if you're a buyer entity working with, say, an attorney like one of us who is in regular contact and communication with the licensing authority, whether it be the TTB or the state authority, I have noticed that if you come to them and they aren't as big on, nitpicking the technicality of what you didn't do or did do, and they do work, you have those relationships. They're willing to work. I've seen, particularly at the TTB level, I've seen them move quickly to accommodate something my client needed, when we had gone down a different path and they had to course correct. They've been very helpful and flexible about moving those applications and amendments and things along to get things done.
Very true. One other thing I'll mention again, because if you are trying to do any updates or amendments to your TTB license, because this has now happened twice, so I'm starting to think this is a new procedure they have in place or a new policy, but they're now doing audits. So I had a client needing an amendment. They just wanted to change something, and the TTB was like, "You haven't filed your, reports for about 6 months. Yeah, we're not going to do anything till you get that done." And that's the first time. I mean, I've been doing this for 14 years. First time, I've seen that particular hold up, and then it happened again to another client. So I think this might be new policy. So, I mean, not that you shouldn't be doing your reporting on a timely basis anyway, but keep in mind that not keeping up on your general compliance is going to become a cog in if you're trying to sell or if you're trying to buy an existing brewery and they haven't kept up on things, which of course is something you need to know anyway, but it's going to slow down that purchase, just as another note. And in California, if you want to bring on new investors let's say you already have an existing brewery and you're buying another brewery, but you want to bring on investors for this new brewery, but you don't want them to be part of your old brewery. And I have to tell people, in that case, if you're not bringing them into your original entity and you create a new entity to buy this brewery, at least in California, you are two different breweries. You are not the same brewery, and you cannot, share your beer back and forth. You are now two different breweries. And that seems to be a stumbling block for a lot of people, mentally, well, wait, I don't understand why I can't add additional investors for this new location. Brooke, is that an issue in South Carolina that you've seen?
It is now. We recently enacted a transfer between brewery provision, which unfortunately does not match the federal version, as much as they push for that. But here it's got to be identical ownership, even down to the specific entity, which from a lawyer's perspective drives me crazy because, well, if I'm having separate locations, I'm wanting separate entities most likely. But regardless, it's very important, and it goes to, at least here, what is your ultimate goal in buying this other brewery? Are you trying to buy other breweries? What are you trying to actually accomplish by doing that? Or is it just we just have 2 or 3 standalone things?
Awesome. Jeff, what about your neck of the woods?
Well, ironically, no, because Minnesota's laws are all based upon the premise of we don't want AB InBev to ever buy one of our craft breweries. So they put so many poison pills into our statutes. So it makes it for example, you can't have more than one tap room, which is a huge disincentive for one brewery to acquire another brewery. We just don't see it here. Because, and that's, so we end up with breweries. I'll have clients with one facility in Minnesota and one in Wisconsin, right? Because it's just not possible for them to legally operate. Unless you just want to have a separate production facility, you wouldn't acquire anybody. And so many of these breweries that are up for sale were under the old, production brewery, but also a tap room model. And so, no, we don't see it because of just the way that our laws were created. We don't. I would like to have that problem, but we don't.
Gotcha. So one thing we haven't touched on is And again, this is, I think, more if you are purchasing an entity, but how important are, and this again, I think this is going to be a state to state type of thing, so we can at least comment on our existing areas of expertise, but violations or, things on the existing liquor license. So things the old owner did that, are you inheriting that as a new owner? Does the state licensing, how do they look on that? And I'll start with Brooke.
Yeah. It matters to me. I do want to know those things in due diligence. We have a specific kind of quirk, and this goes to additional research into about the specific location, and obviously there are legal and non-legal implications there. But we have an interesting quirk where if there are maybe not, I shouldn't say violations, but let's just say certain check marks, hey, have the police been called to this location on more than one occasion? Has there ever been, a crime committed? Certain things that might make that location, while they are licensed now, that would make our regulators, think twice about licensing it in the future. Those do come up from time to time, but we at least want to know what the status is with them and with the brewery getting bought. So those are important, even if we would be coming in under a different entity, but we would still want to know just in case.
Jeff?
Obviously, what Brooke said, you want to know about them. I honestly haven't seen a whole lot of any kind of license violations from my brewery clients. I've had situations more on the bar and restaurant side, because you get into they serve somebody underage, they got caught in a sting or something like that. The breweries tend to be, I don't know, they just tend to behave better. I don't know what the deal is, but you definitely would want to look, to the extent that you could get those records. You'd want to find those out, and it may be that they won't share those, that the licensing authority won't share those with you or your client as the buyer. So you're going to have to ask the seller to request those and provide those too.
Gotcha. Yeah, one thing that we've run into, which is not an issue with infractions, which, yes, if you're taking over someone's license, those infractions, it might as well be you that did them. If you're buying the entity and taking over that license, that's still on your quote unquote record. But as both Brooke and Jeff mentioned, even if not, what's gone on at the location is important. The thing that I ran into recently, and this is an area that we don't really deal in much, just because there's other service providers who help with this, is we just had somebody, and it's interesting, they're the third brewery in this location, and I have actually had dealings with the two breweries prior. So the first thing we ran into with my clients who were doing their licensing is the two breweries back still had an active TTB permit at that location, which I'm not sure how that was still there when the second brewery was there, but so we had to, and that was actually an old client, so I was able to call them and go, hey, by the way, do you know that this is still active? And I'm happy to turn it off for you, because it's actually very easy to turn off your TTB license, But I've noticed, and I think this happens in trademarks too, people close, and I don't know, maybe it's the, emotion of closing, and I mean closing as opposed to selling, and they don't go in and cancel everything. If you're not getting billed for it, they don't cancel it, or they don't cancel it until they get billed for it. So you have trademarks that just kind of float out there registered, because nothing has to be filed on them for about 5 years. So someone could go out of business. They're not going to call the trademark office and, surrender their trademark necessarily. I mean, it'd be great if they did. They should surrender their TTB license. You have a lot more potential ramifications there, but things get missed. But the other thing we're running into is locality issues. And again, this is something that I don't generally deal with much, but we have a client who, and again, the brewery in the middle didn't do it, but they need an entertainment. They want to have live music, and there's the city actually requires entertainment permit, which we weren't aware of just because I don't deal with the city licenses very often. I tend to deal with the alcohol because there's other local providers. And then we have somebody else who needs a minor use permit, and didn't know, like, all the way down the process, and now finding out they have to do this. So you want to make sure you do kind of the due diligence on all these other permits that might be in play that, like I said, is a lot of times it's your contractor, your architect, the people doing your build out that might be more familiar or deal with those more often. But I did want to mention those as something we've run into lately.
You know, Candace, to your point about the trademarks and the assignments of those and the timing of that, this is one of those. I got actually a recent story. It's a good example for us practitioners of how due diligence as a business development tool and all those checklists. So we had that on the list. We had a client that was selling. The other party wasn't. They were kind of doing things themselves. We had put together the list of the trademarks, and after the closing, I reached out to our client and said, hey, who's the trademark counsel? We need to get the attorney of record transferred. And my client disclosed to me, I don't think they have a trademark attorney, much less any attorney. Let me make an introduction. We ended up taking over representation of the buyer post-closing for all the trademarks, and are working with them now, simply because I had it on the checklist to make sure we got the transfer done, after closing of those trademarks. So, you do your homework, do your due diligence. It can result in business for you, for the lawyer too. Nice.
Yeah, we've actually, and I think, again, probably just because the brewing industry is so tight and cohesive, and there aren't that many, I think, practitioners who specialize in, that area, that we've picked up a lot of clients post transaction as well. Probably more from the licensing side. What other questions do I have? Actually, I think we are getting kind of closer to time. So why don't we jump into final words of wisdom, but feel free to kind of expound. Like, this isn't a quick, last two words, as much as if there's any advice you'd like to give to someone looking to purchase a brewery, what would it be, Brooke?
This is not a legal advertisement, but you can't stress it enough. This is super complicated. This is super nuanced. It's super detailed, and it's probably something you don't want to have on your plate. It costs money, but you're spending money anyway to buy something that can benefit you. So highly, highly recommend employing counsel on this. And just overall, kind of like what we talk about when we talk about just the whole idea of starting a brewery in general is just to make sure that, your reasoning is sound and that you actually review all of the due diligence and you make sure that this is actually the right decision, because there's going to be a lot of reasons not to do it. There's going to be probably some yellow flags, at least, probably some red flags too. And if those are there, please don't ignore them. At least give them the review that they deserve.
Jeff?
Well, I'll close with two thoughts. Number one, given where we are in the industry right now, and unfortunately, it only takes a few players to cause panic amongst lenders. I think it is actually a more viable path right now if you want to get into the brewing industry, to acquire a brewery that's for sale versus trying to do a startup. Certainly, post-pandemic, lenders are very hesitant to finance a startup hospitality business. It's damn near impossible. So coming in and saying, I'm buying an existing brand, it's a going concern, that's actually I think an easier lift right now, despite all the complexities about licensing and everything else. I think that might be a better play right now than trying to start from scratch. The second thing I would say is that I would echo what Brooke said in terms of the shameless plug for the lawyers. I mean, and I tell clients this all the time. buying or selling a business can be a very stressful thing. You may go through it once. We go through it maybe 4 or 5 times in a month. We do this many times. And so you get the benefit of our experience, and we may run into an obstacle on a transaction that we've seen on another deal, and we can figure out a way around it or figure a way to resolve it. So yes, we cost money, but I think we end up possibly, it could be the difference between the deal going through or the deal not going through if you don't have somebody on your team that's an experienced practitioner that knows how to navigate some of those things when they arise.
I can't agree with both of you more. I think that mine are, and this is somewhat too, I think a lot of people when looking at buying a brewery, they're looking at, let me look at the equipment. Let me make sure everything works okay. And this is the same thing. You got to look at the paperwork. I mean, you got to make sure the business side of it also works okay and look at the numbers. You've got to kick the tires of the whole thing, not just the actual equipment, but how the business is set up, and again, I can't stress enough, like the record keeping, which actually will lead to my second one, which is you need to really try to not get emotionally attached to a brewery you want to purchase. So this is going to be my little story that was every red flag as we started digging in to do the due diligence. First was the employee records, or the lack of them. And this was a brewery that had been open for 20 years. So the longer the brewery's been open, that's the longer time they've had to screw up and have issues. And so we started, raising red flags there. And the guy's like, no, I really want this place. And that's when we found, I think missing contracts were next. And then I think it did culminate with the lease that had already been violated because they hadn't told anyone about the owner that left. And I mean, for one thing, the guy kept having us do more due diligence, which did cost him more money. He did end up not purchasing the brewery. He was very unhappy with us, I think, because he really wanted to buy the brewery, and we did finally convince him it was a real, or no, not I said buying the brewery, I mean buying the entity, that it was a really, really, really bad idea because of all these red flags. But back to the shameless plug, this is a very expensive deal you're running into. And my general advice, because no one likes to have people review contracts, but the more the contract is worth, more important it is to have an attorney involved to review it. And when you look at your cost and benefit analysis, it's a small cost when you're looking at a contract that's, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, spending, $10,000 on an attorney or less or even more makes sense in the long run. And you will eventually potentially save yourself money by spending, because this guy probably spent $15,000 to $10,000 on due diligence because he really wanted us to keep going and keep digging because he really wanted this brewery. But I think it was clearly an emotional want versus a business decision because he just didn't want to see the reality. So my advice is when going into this, and it's just like house hunting, don't fall in love with a building only to find out that, it's falling apart, I guess, kind of thing. Laura, did you want to say anything?
One of the things that we've come back to over and over, season 1, getting into season 2, is the fact that we all in our personal lives have great people in our world. We have doctors, lawyers, insurance people, there's professionals all over in your life, and they all have their specialties. And it's not stepping on anybody's toes if you are doing a transaction like this to find somebody who has experience in the beer industry. Same with insurance. If you're buying a brewery, you may have a great insurance person for your house or for your car that may not really understand the ins and outs of a brewery and insuring a brewery. And I just think that there's a lot to be said for finding somebody that has this specialty. It's not any disservice to the other people in that profession in your world to find somebody that this is their specialty. So I think that that's of value.
I will actually, oddly enough, not give a shameless plug, I'm going to actually say that you actually don't need, I don't think in these instances, you need a specialized alcohol attorney except for maybe the licensing. Really, I would rather see you use a good corporate attorney or who has experience in purchase agreements and that side of it, maybe with the consult of an alcohol attorney. Because other than the licensing, the rest of it is something that a corporate attorney, I think, does. And by corporate, I mean mergers, acquisitions, does, I think, on a daily basis. But Jeff, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was doing another panel discussion last week about succession planning, and someone brought up the same point, that your day-to-day business attorney isn't necessarily the person that you're going to use when selling your business, right? Same thing with buying a business. There are attorneys that are more familiar with the acquisition process, like we've been talking about today, that are probably better suited. Just like you said, Candace, we all have clients that probably have their own business attorney, but come to us for the distribution agreements and the licensing and the regulatory. Specialization has just become the norm in our profession. And so, yeah, you may have 2 or 3 attorneys on the team, and that's okay.
Yeah. And part of it too is I recently had a client go through this, and they probably spent a total hour of my time because the heavy lifting was done by the merger and acquisition attorney. Because the purchase agreement is the heavy lifting. And I just kind of gave, I reviewed the parts about the alcohol, the licenses and how that would work and what was needed. And not to say, and honestly, if your alcohol attorney is Jeff O'Brien, I think you'd be in great hands doing a merger and acquisition. But yeah, I don't know. Don't feel like you have to have an alcohol specialist to do this alone. Actually, I think, yeah, they should probably have some input. Brooke, what are your thoughts?
Ditto.
Meaning, what do you agree? In terms of, is this something that you would take on at whole? Would you farm it out? Would you obviously want to be involved to some extent? But what are your thoughts on?
I'd take it on because I need the business. But if it's not something I couldn't handle, I certainly wouldn't take it. But I do agree to the point that, yes, I think if you have competent M&A counsel who can, do the bulk of the work, then that's a good thing, with, a brief consult on, basically the impact on licensing, the impact on 3-tier rules, that type of thing. I think you could certainly go that route, be very happy and very successful with it. Yeah, so I completely agree.
Well, and from a lawyer standpoint, it means that when we have those conflicts, we don't have to refer them to another alcohol attorney. You can send them to an M&A attorney. Okay, I'm going to throw it back to Laura now.
Okay, well, it just sounds like everybody needs to have that conversation about what they're comfortable with, and where they need support. I think this is an awesome platform to build on for this whole purchasing an existing brewery mission that we're on here, and I appreciate Brooke and Jeff joining us and throwing in their 5, 10, 15, 25 cents with you, Candace. I think that it's really neat to see the stories in the different states and the different things that you've each gone through, because it's all different. So also thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for our first episode of season 2, and listening later to people who are going to listen in the future for episode 25, purchasing an existing brewery. I feel like this was more than legal. It's legal with this overall side of strategy for the Startup Brewery podcast. We invite you to join us for our next episode, 26, moving into questions around financial considerations with this existing business you're thinking about purchasing. This new episode will be released at the very crack of dawn on Tuesday, July 16th.
Did you know the Craft Beer Attorney offers monthly subscriptions for compliance, reporting, and other legal needs? Save on attorney hourly rates by signing up for an annual monthly subscription. We also offer 6-month starter subscriptions for those in planning. We have various package options, including our starter for business formation, trademark filings, and state and federal application review. Pay monthly and get all you need done. Contact us today to find out more. Go to craftbeerattorney.com and click Contact CBA for a complimentary consultation.
While you're anticipating the release of our next episode, feel free to visit the Startup Brewery website at startupbrewery.com, a completely free resource. Regardless of your brewery stage or age, Be sure to look through the task lists offered for Plan, Act, Open, and Grow, at the educational resources, and at the offerings from our savvy contributors and our growing library. You can also sign up for an occasional electronic update with new Start a Brewery contributors, content, events, and more great information on the contact page of the website. We also encourage you to explore the All About Beer website at allaboutbeer.com. Perhaps pop in to enjoy one of their excellent podcasts as well. In the meantime, this has been Laura Lodge and Candace Moon wishing you a terrific day and thanking you once again for joining us on our podcast journey to start a brewery.